No, the New Orleans Saints should not be interested in Atlanta Falcons quarterback Kirk Cousins. We got all of that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net. And on today's episode, the New Orleans Saints did not process the retirements of quarterback Derek Carr nor offensive tackle Ryan Ramczyk, but I'm going to tell you why you shouldn't be worried about that. There's not an about face on the way. Jonathan Bullard set to visit the defensive tackle, set to visit the New Orleans Saints sometime this week. I'll tell you why he would be a great signing for New Orleans. And we're going to kick everything off with somebody that would not be a great signing for New Orleans. And that's quarterback Kirk Cousins, who I believe the New Orleans Saints should stay away from. We got all that coming up for you on today's episode. We appreciate you very much, whether it's your first time or your next time, for being here with us this time, making us your first listen, and being it every day. You're here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. No, the New Orleans Saints should not be interested in Kirk Cousins. There's two different ways to have this conversation, and two of the different ways to have the conversation have two different ways to talk about the conversation. So I'm going to break this down very, very specifically. Let's start with why the New Orleans Saints should not be interested in pursuing Kirk Cousins as a starter for their offense, okay? Let's just go down that road because this is something I have seen people genuinely suggest. Now, we should mention that there's a lot of right now tying together the Saints and Kirk Cousins because there's interest. There's never been any reported interest between the team and the player. What you're seeing is called speculation, not report, right? So what you're seeing is this website publishes a list of top 10 fits for this quarterback, and the Saints are on that list. Or, predictions of where quarterbacks might land, or where upcoming free agents or big name free agents or June 1st, post June 1 transactions might land, and all these other things. And then you're seeing Kirk Cousins land with the New Orleans Saints in those speculative articles. I want to be very clear. That's not the same thing as reported interest, right? There have been go back to the, I almost sound like Porky Pig there for a second. Go back to like the Chris Olave, Pittsburgh Steelers connection earlier this offseason. It would have been speculation if it was that some website somewhere suggested, here's the trade package that could get Chris Olave from New Orleans to Pittsburgh. But it's different when there are those of us with sources telling you, no, yeah, the Pittsburgh Steelers reached out and the Saints effectively said no by placing a high price tag. So those are two different things, right? That's a report, the Chris Olave situation. What's happening with the Kirk Cousins thing is a lot of speculation that's either being taken into mainstream conversation or fan conversation or whatever, or that's just kind of misrepresenting itself, which does happen in some cases. It's just the world that we live in. So with that out of the way, let's talk about this in the two different ways that this all comes together. The Saints should not be interested in Kirk Cousins as a starter for a couple of different reasons. First of all, no thank you. Secondly, the New Orleans Saints need to get to a point now to where they are worried about what their future is going to be, not going out and signing another 30-plus year old quarterback to come in and try to win with the team as it is. The New Orleans Saints are not in that position. They should not try to be in that position. They should be focused on, with a brand new head coach, brand new offensive system, brand new defensive system, pretty much all new everything right now for the New Orleans Saints. They should be focused on the players that are going to be with them for the long haul. Obvious, and what I mean by that are the players that will be their future, not a guy like Kirk Cousins who might be half of your season's present, right? Because we saw what he looked like in Atlanta, the way that things fell apart. We saw sort of the downturn that already began during his time in Minnesota. None of it is appealing. None of it is the quarterback that an organization should feel like they can go out there and win with. You have to be desperate enough to say, this is going to be the guy that's going to lead you through. I think that's just the point of Kirk Cousins' career that he's at this point. Now, I could be wrong. He ends up in the right system, in the right situations. I believe the same thing about Sam Darnold. And then last year, he ended up with Kevin O'Connell and everything went was awesome for him. I don't think he's going to be as successful in Seattle, but I thought he was really successful in Kevin O'Connell. Could Kellen Moore be that to Kirk Cousins? Sure, absolutely. Kellen Moore's kind of a genius. It all works. It could potentially work, but where the lifespan of the New Orleans Saints is at this moment, where they are from a team building perspective, it does not make sense. So to sign him as a free agent or to try to trade for him, which is like the worst situation possible, especially if you're trying to get him over as a starter, and the Atlanta Falcons know that you're a division rival, you're trading for a quarterback, which means you're going to get upcharged. You're trading with a division rival, which means you're going to get upcharged. You're trading for a quarterback from a division rival, you're going to get robbed. You're going to get absolutely robbed in that situation. So just avoid that, stay away from it. No need. So the two ways to get him as your starter: free agency or trade. Free agency, there are other teams that should be in that running. The Indianapolis Colts, the Pittsburgh Steelers, who still don't have Aaron Rodgers at this time. Those teams could be looking at that player if he hits free agency and saying, let's bring him to Indy, let's bring him to Pittsburgh, where they might feel like they can compete. And the New Orleans Saints are not in that class of conversation at the moment. They shouldn't be in that delusion of a conversation like maybe Indianapolis would be. And so for me, I think the Saints should play this smart and be focused on the players that are here to be a part of their future, not the player that could potentially show up and give them half of a season. The other thing and the other side of the conversation is, well, what if you were to bring him in as a backup, as a veteran backup, to be sort of the veteran mentor for your young quarterbacks? So that immediately takes the trade portion out of it, right? You don't trade for that player. You're not trading for a veteran quarterback on a bad contract to bring him to your team to be the backup veteran leader, backup veteran example setter. If you're able to sign him in free agency without having to get into a bargaining, war with, or negotiations war with two teams that are looking to potentially sign him as a starter or could look to sign him as a starter, and you can get him on a vet minimum deal, 100%. He's going to walk away from Atlanta with good money. Maybe that's going to allow him to be in a situation to where he could go out there and sign a deal where he wouldn't be expected to be a starter, where he would come in and be a backup, a veteran backup and all this stuff, and he does it on a vet minimum deal, fine. But unlikely that that's going to be the case, because you've got teams out there that are potentially going to be looked to pay him. If he hits the open market, that would be willing to look to pay him to be their starter. So you're going to end up in a bidding war in a class of contracts that you're not even trying to deal in. So just leave that all alone. And then I would even go so far as to say, if the Saints really wanted the veteran leader at quarterback, they have options already that might even be better than Kirk Cousins. Like, Kirk Cousins has never really come off as somebody that has been a good, look, the Minnesota Vikings got a young quarterback in the building, and instead of trying to work things out with Kirk Cousins to have him be, a veteran leader or a veteran guy, a veteran, example setter, a role model or whatever, they got rid of him. He shows up in Atlanta, he gets overtaken by the rookie, and now he might be on his way out in Atlanta before he ever even gets the opportunity to be that veteran mentor. There's no track record of Kirk Cousins being that guy. And so I don't think of him, right now at least, as that guy. So I don't think you can win games with him. I don't think he's going to make your young quarterbacks better. And I don't think that you need to get involved in the bidding war that could happen with teams that might be looking to bring him in as a starter. He'll probably end up in Indianapolis or Pittsburgh or something like that. Indianapolis feels like a really good fit for him. An opportunity there with Daniel Jones, who's not going to turn his career around anytime soon, and Anthony Richardson, who no one knows about. Land in Indy and then get your shot there. I think the New Orleans Saints should stay away from this one, if for no other reason than to make sure that they are putting all of their focus into players that can be a part of their future, as opposed to trying to win now with a veteran quarterback that no one's really sure about. Now, while Kirk Cousins might not make a lot of sense for the New Orleans Saints, a visit with defensive lineman Jonathan Bullard is a signing that makes perfect sense. Let me tell you why next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends over at LinkedIn Jobs. As a small business owner, you know that work doesn't stop when the clock hits 5. You're always thinking about your business, and you want to make sure that you have something around you to support you that's going to work as hard as you do. And that's where LinkedIn Jobs comes in. They're going to help you find those qualified candidates you want to talk to faster and for free. You know, as a small business owner, your business is only as successful as the people that you bring in to help you run it. That's why LinkedIn Jobs is the place to go. expansive networks. Their new Post Your Job feature will help write your job descriptions for you, make the job a little bit easier. It's why 72% of small business owners say that LinkedIn Jobs helps them find qualified hires quickly. High quality hires. You're going to be able to find that over at LinkedIn Jobs. Go and check them out. You can post your job for free today at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. All right, family. The New Orleans Saints set to host defensive lineman Jonathan Bullard, 9-year veteran in the NFL, came into the league in 2016 as a Chicago Bear. Defensive lineman that can play inside and out, 6'3", 290-ish pounds, former Florida Gator, proven to be pretty disruptive and proven to be a very, very active run stopper, especially despite his size as well. Remember, I said 290 pounds. Usually when we're talking about those run stopping or run stuffing defensive tackles, we're talking about 320, 315-ish pounds, all those other things. But Bullard is just somebody that makes a lot of sense for where it is that the New Orleans Saints are trying to get good, if you will. Look, the Saints are expected to bring him in and host him, kind of bring him in for a visit. This came from NFL media, Mike Garafolo. This is a guy that's got ties to New Orleans Saints defensive coordinator Brandon Staley. They were in Chicago together while Brandon Staley in 2017 and 2018 was the outside linebackers coach. Bullard was still there in Chicago before he ended up heading elsewhere. And he also overlapped with Jay Rodgers, who is now the Saints edges coach. He was the defensive line coach all 3 years of Bullard's years or seasons rather in Chicago. So a little bit of, connective, a little bit of connection with this New Orleans Saints coaching staff. And so keep in mind that this is a new coaching staff that has no loyalties within the building very much. I think guys like Jonah Williams, I think guys like Brian Brzee, I think Devon Godshaw, like these are all guys that have some kind of connection already that kind of makes them solidify. But you look at some of these other guys that were brought in a couple of years ago, Nathan Shepard, Colin Saunders, all that, there's a chance that like these guys are going to be in a little bit of competition with players, right? The Saints brought in Vernon Broughton as well. I think that he's pretty solid there. And so every one of these players has a path to making the roster, and Jonathan Bullard absolutely would as well. Couple of my favorite things about Jonathan Bullard: 6.5 sacks over the course of his 9-year career. Not the most explosive pass rusher ever. 28 tackles for a loss. But the thing that I really like about him is the missed tackles or really lack thereof. This is a guy that's been in the NFL for 9 seasons, and that has averaged about 361 snaps per season, but has never missed more than 3 tackles in a single year in all 9 years that he has spent in the NFL. And that includes being a full-time starter in most of the last 2 seasons. He's appeared in the last 17 games of the last 2 seasons and has also started the last 17 games of the last season. So this isn't a guy that was just like a little bit of a part of a middling rotation or anything like that. This was a guy that, yes, was a part of a rotation, but then eventually became a big time piece to that Minnesota Vikings defensive line. Before that, he was a big part working with guys like Eddie Goldman, others that were a part of that Chicago Bears defensive line that was so good back in 2016, 2017, 2018. And so when you can bring a guy potentially like Jonathan Bullard to New Orleans, and he can bring you some contributions as a strong tackler and as a run defender, 2 places where your defense needs the most help. Let me remind you, the Saints finished amongst the top 5 in missed tackles last season, and then also finished number 31 in the NFL when it came to run defense as well. So when you're looking at where the New Orleans Saints need to improve and need to get better on the defensive side, and you try to find talent that brings what that is, Jonathan Bullard's name should be right there. So we'll see if the Saints end up signing him. We'll see what happens with the visit. Remember that you don't always sign everybody you bring in for a visit. We've seen that before. The Saints brought in guys like Kareem Hunt, Anthony Barr last year. Neither of them ended up signing in New Orleans. I heard Anthony Barr's workout was like not, let's just say, left a lot to be desired. Kareem Hunt didn't even take the field on his workout before he was already going back to Cleveland and everything like that. And then we also saw, was it Cleveland? I'm pretty sure it was Cleveland. And then we also saw earlier this offseason, Asante Samuel Jr., remember, came into New Orleans, had a visit, but probably won't sign anywhere until after he gets his medical checkup back in July. So it's going to be a little bit of time before he ends up signing somewhere. Now, the Saints have 2 roster spots that are pending to open up: the retirement of Derek Carr, the retirement of Ryan Ramczyk, which we're going to discuss here shortly. With those 2 roster spots opening, you have to imagine that positions like wide receiver, corner, defensive line, potentially even offensive line some more, that those are all places where you could absolutely see the Saints bringing in more talent and adding to this roster. And of course, they'll continue to flip talent as well. There's going to be a point through the first couple of weeks of training camp that they're going to move on from some guys and then bring some new guys in, get a look at them, make some decisions a couple weeks after that. And so I think you're going to see kind of a little bit of this roster shuffle over the course of the next few weeks leading up to training camp and everything. But Jonathan Bullard is absolutely a name that I think that the Saints should at least be interested in, depending upon how that workout goes. Got the connection to Brandon Staley, got the connection to Jay Rodgers, even though he'd be working probably more so with Bo Davis, New Orleans Saints defensive line coach, since he'd probably be an in-between the tackles guy, lining up as a 3-4 defensive end or as a 3-4 defensive tackle, kind of nose tackle, or as a 4-3 defensive tackle, one of those types. I think you could see him potentially land in any of those spots. And we certainly saw that during his time if you go back to his time working kind of adjacent to Brandon Staley during his days over in Chicago. That's kind of what he did. Did the same thing over in Minnesota, where he played some defensive tackle, played out to the ends in some cases, all those other things. So you get a bit of versatility as well. And again, you get those big things that you need: help in the run defense and help with tackling. The Saints' tackling issues were huge last year. I mean, it forced them to give up yards after catch. It forced them to give up yards after contact as well. It's one of the reasons why they were one of the worst run defenses in the league last year, all those other pieces. And so I think that when you can bring in these players that can help you out there and can be more sure tacklers, you saw that with the draft class, right? Jonas Sanker, good tackler. Quincy Riley, strong tackler. Danny Stutzman, strong tackler. Vernon Broughton, strong tackler. Like, you saw that the whole way through this NFL draft period. It does not surprise me to see them take that to kind of the late free agency period as well. So probably wouldn't be a big contract for a guy like Jonathan Bullard either. Could probably sign a veteran minimum, maybe slightly above. He was a starter last year and effectively was, a 34-game player over the course of the past 2 seasons, but not much more expensive than that. So if he ends up signing, it's probably going to be cost effective. And again, brings the New Orleans Saints a little bit of everything that they need. So I think it'd be a very, very smart signing for the New Orleans Saints to bring in Jonathan Bullard, assuming that the workout and the visit goes well. If those things don't go well, you'll listen to that, of course. Coming up next, the New Orleans Saints did not process the retirements of quarterback Derek Carr nor offensive lineman Ryan Ramczyk, so they must not be retiring, right? No, I'm just kidding. We'll break down why you should not be concerned about this taking an extra day or so. We got that coming up for you next. We continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. The New Orleans Saints did not process, or at least the NFL, did not process the retirements of Derek Carr nor Ryan Ramczyk on June 2nd. If you checked out yesterday's episode, you were prepared for that to potentially be the case. If not, let me explain to you why you shouldn't be panicking. Look, post-June 1 transactions don't have to happen on June 2nd. June 2nd is the earliest at which a post-June 1 transaction can take place, because that is the first day after June 1st. So there is that piece of it, don't get me wrong. But whether or not the New Orleans Saints process these or the NFL processes these retirements June 2nd or June 22nd is kind of irrelevant for a couple of different reasons. First of which is that it doesn't change the money at any point. You'll have to hold on to the roster spots, but you're probably okay holding on to the roster spots until training camp anyway. You might be looking to sign players like Jonathan Bullard, though. So if you're looking to sign a player like Jonathan Bullard sooner rather than later, you're probably going to get one of those transactions published. The other thing is that you don't have to worry about either of these players all of a sudden about facing and saying that they're not going to, okay, well, never mind. I'm not retiring. Derek Carr has already given back money. So has Ryan Ramczyk, right? Ryan Ramczyk saw his base salary reduced and saved the Saints $16.7 million back in January and announced the retirement himself. Derek Carr announced the retirement himself, all those other things. These guys are not about to about face or about to do anything kind of crazy. In fact, if Derek Carr were to try to come back and say, you know what, never mind, I'm not going to retire anymore, then with basically him giving the Saints back that $30 million as a part of that retirement situation, the Saints could say, okay, great, you don't get your money back because you already gave the money back, but gonna trade you. That way they get an asset back. So it actually wouldn't be the worst situation for New Orleans if that were to happen. Like, it wouldn't be as bad a situation as it sounds, because there's not going to be something that goes on here that's going to make the New Orleans Saints say, oh, well, I guess you get your $30 million back then. And so I think in that case, it's not the end of the world, even if that were to happen, but it's not going to happen. I have some speculation, some thoughts about why potentially this didn't happen. Saints simply might not have been in the office on Monday, right? Could have been that simple to where they just weren't processing transactions on Monday. I don't know that for sure, but as they're going through OTAs and things like that, maybe there's something about when and who's in the building at what points over the course of this week as they get ready for OTA practices to ramp back up this week, that maybe that's just that has a bit of an impact in terms of schedule and things like that. The other thing is, whose retirement did process on Monday? Teron Armstead, former New Orleans Saint. Curious, right? A little bit of conversation with the Miami Dolphins. Hey, y'all processing, Teron Armstead's retirement? Should he have his day? Yeah, maybe. Okay, well, you guys do that. We'll process ours on the 3rd or something like that. Like, it's just kind of respectful, right? In some cases. Now, I don't know. I have nothing at all in the world that has told me that either of those things are true for why this didn't happen. I'm just trying to think about different things that we've seen over the course of the NFL's lifespan, over the course of time, that could potentially have led to this. And so I don't think that what you're expecting to see right now is a team that's about to change its mind about these players retiring, or players that are about to change their mind on retiring from the team. And so I wouldn't be concerned at this point. Is it something that like you'd love to just have it over and done with and said and done with? 100%. I think the Saints absolutely should have gotten this done right away. Get both those roster spots open. Give those roster spots to your coaching staff, to your new coaching staff that's looking to go out there and get those spots filled. Let them go out there and start doing that work and everything, even though they're kind of already doing the work, right? They brought in Asante Samuel Jr. last month. They brought in Jonathan Bullard this week. And so I think that like you're seeing that there is some expectation that there's going to be some roster spots available here very soon. And so I don't think that this is a push the panic button, oh my God, Derek Carr is coming back to be the quarterback kind of a situation at all. I want to be very, very clear about that. But the logistics between this processing on June 2nd versus June 5th, not really a big deal, right? Like nothing really changes. The Saints don't get less money or anything like that back. That's $1.255 million back for each of those guys. The money's coming back to the Saints when it comes to Derek Carr's $30 million base salary. Like all of this stuff is said and done. There's nothing to be concerned about here. And if there is anything to be concerned about, the Saints are going to come out on top of that situation, especially if it comes around this whole Derek Carr thing. And if something weird or funky does happen, it's not going to result in Derek Carr coming back in a New Orleans Saints uniform. And if it does, we will have seen something very unprecedented that we have never seen in the NFL before. And so I would be okay with being wrong about that because we've never seen anything like that before in the NFL. So don't be concerned. Don't be concerned until something actually happens that's kind of like wild and crazy. But until nothing wild and crazy happens, there's nothing to be concerned about here. Devin Neal might get number 4, and the Saints are going to get $30 million back over the course of the next 2 seasons. And there's going to be a quarterback competition for a young quarterback. Like what we have been told will be the case, will still be the case. I wouldn't be too worried about this. And like I said, unless something dramatically crazy happens, in which case I'm grateful I have the job that I have because I get to just talk about it. They're the ones that would have to explain it and suss it all out. And I wouldn't want that responsibility. On top of, potential post-June 1 transactions and things like that, this is a time also to keep an eye out over the course of the next few days for other teams that didn't necessarily process things that they are planning to do, such as post-June 1 releases. This is where teams sometimes will make the decision to move on from a player after they've gotten a chance to see them a little bit more during OTAs, maybe a system change or something like that. It's a good player, but doesn't necessarily fit their vision. And then so now post June 1, they have the ability to be able to kind of spread out those salary cap, dead cap consequences over the course of 2 years. And then so they could make some decisions to potentially move on from some players. So if you're somebody that's still hoping that the Saints bring in another wide receiver, bring in another offensive tackle, defensive lineman, cornerback, safety, anything like that, right? Any position. Now is the time to kind of keep an eye out to see if there are any kind of surprise transactions that take place. This happens every now and then. And it's not surprise transactions like, oh, well, this team didn't want this player anymore because this player is bad. And so they waited until after June 1st to spread the cap hit out. Sometimes it's just a player gets an opportunity to show up at OTAs, gets an opportunity to show up at mandatory minicamp. They get into their new system. It doesn't really work for them, or things don't feel like they're a fit. And it's a cost-effective way to say, okay, well, let's part ways. And then you go and land somewhere where you'll be able to do it. And it could be a cut, it could be a trade, things like that. So like some of those doors and pathways could potentially start to open up depending upon the barometer of all the relationships around the NFL. So just something to keep an eye out on, as there's a little bit more freedom now for teams to move on from players that maybe don't necessarily fit their vision in terms of what they're doing, but might fit someone else's vision. So just a time to keep an eye out on all of those things. All right, coming up in tomorrow's episode, I'll have some cool stuff to share with you from the New Orleans Saints. And then we've also got a quick look at what I wanted to take a look back at, which was the last time that the New Orleans Saints had a first team All-Pro, and are they in line to have one again in the next few years? Let's break all of that down, and you let me know what you think in the meanwhile on tomorrow's episode of Locked on Saints. We appreciate you very much, as always, for making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. If you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing, let me know how you living. Let me know how you momming them. And trust you, that nation, I'll holla at you.